Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing a 25.14 ADC tier list. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are actually a decent amount of changes towards the ADC role this patch. With the release of Yunara combined with the buffs towards Kraken Slayer and Borg, it's actually adjusted some of the champions around a bit and gives quite a decent amount to cover. Ziggs also got a pretty sizable buff this patch, so he is a champion which I do want to talk about a bit more in depth. Let's get into it. So the DT is still going to consist of one champion, and that is still going to be Kalista. I still do not recommend this champion for almost any elo bracket at this point. It's pretty common knowledge now that Kalista is just not a very good champion. Her underperformance at MSI combined with her pretty aggressive drop in priority, and then like as a mirror of that, solo queue, she's been performing quite badly for a while. Kalista has never really been a great solo queue performance champion. She tends to rely on certain things which just aren't as powerful or aren't as consistent in solo queue, or don't really get exploited as much. But things like the really aggressive laning phase, being able to have priority for like your first objectives, doesn't really get used as much. Being able to utilize your ultimate effectively, you're kind of relying on your support to have some level of like understanding of your champion, just doesn't usually come to fruition, and she really suffers as a champion for it. I think the only way I could see Kalista coming back as an option within solo queue is with some like genuine work done to her, because she probably can't get there without like being once again overwhelming competitive just through buffs. She needs some sort of kit reshape. What that comes down to, I don't really know. They could do things with her ultimate, they could do things with her W and her passive with that matter. It'd be interesting to see, but right now, Kalista, it's just not a pick I'd really recommend. She did benefit from the Borg buffs. That is like the saving grace, you could argue, of this patch, but still not enough to really shift that out of the tier. Yunara, I'm going to lead her with being in the C tier. I don't think she's actually a C tier pick. She probably is more like an A, maybe even an S tier pick, going into maybe the like higher mastery players or like into next patch. If you've sunk a lot of time into this champion, she's quite rewarding. She has a pretty noticeable mastery curve. Understanding how to do her auto resets with like her empowered abilities is meaningful. Like, it gives her pretty sizable DPS increase, and that, yeah, is just going to come down to people understanding the champion more. At this point, Riot are pretty happy releasing champions like with Yunara's kind of like mastery shape. I like your 44, your 45% win rates, because they will gradually increase, and yeah, she looks like she will be performing long term. I never really recommend playing a champion on the first like patch of its release. Traditionally, the builds are quite bad, or the like understanding of the champion is quite weak, which is why I traditionally just recommend waiting 2 weeks, kind of getting a better understanding, like using the resources kind of available to you to learn the champion, and then going from there. But if you want to learn the champion, I think she's a pretty nice champion to learn. I think you probably should put time into her. Just don't use solo queue as your practice at the moment, or your main. Maybe use a Smurf, because you can then kind of like build up a knowledge and like mastery level of the champion, which enables you to kind of win more consistently on the pick. Brand is gone for the moment. He's consistently only really paired alongside Nami when played in the bot lane role. I don't really recommend him outside of that pairing. Right now, Brand just as a champion is in one of his weaker states. He's lost a lot of chip damage, combined with like some of his items being nerfed, and just the other like picks around him kind of shifting traditionally to just be better. It's not a pick I really recommend at the moment, so I'm going to remove him, especially because his pick rate's just so low. It's like the same kind of like victim like Karthus, but I think Karthus is still like a viable bot laner if you want to play it. Draven sits within the C tier. He is incredibly volatile. I mean, that goes without saying. The champion relies really heavily on snowballing early advantages when closing out games, which is not a skill traditionally like exploited through mid to low elo players. It's why champions like Corki don't do as well within this elo bracket either. I mean, Corki's an easier champion, and for that I do recommend him over a pick like Draven, but they aren't consistent win cons unless you are very good at closing out games, and you understand kind of like the power of where the power of these champions lies, and like that specifically being in the early game. Or in Corki's case, more from like his 3 through 9, and then like 9 through 13 almost. It's like that's where Corki really shines as a champion, because he gets access to a lot of wave clear, lots of just straight up AoE and just raw damage in his kit, enables him to be really strong at those points in the game. So Corki, I recommend him over Draven, purely because he's just a bit easier to play and a bit easier to understand, but they aren't champions which I recommend for mid to low elo, unless you once again have pretty good understanding of like the win condition of these picks. Ezreal, I just think isn't in a great state at the moment. His itemization's kind of mediocre, and the pick has kind of fallen a bit on the back burner. I still think if you're very comfortable playing Ezreal, you can make him work in the right spots, but for like general audience, I don't recommend this champion. He could probably even be below Yunara. He's getting close to, okay, he's not getting close to Kalista tier. Kalista's quite by like a far margin, like a D tier champion. Ezreal probably just sits towards the low end of the C tier at the moment, just a pick I don't really recommend. And then Kai'Sa, she could maybe be bumped up to the B tier. She's just a bit harder to pilot through just being a bit more unique than some of the other marksmen, but if you're very comfortable on her, and most ADCs at this point are pretty comfortable on her, because she just has so many games and so many people have played this champion, that the understanding of the pick is fair. So Kai'Sa, I think if you're very comfortable on it, you can definitely bump it up a couple of tiers. For more mid to low mastery players and just mid elo, I don't think she's quite as good, especially in some of your more enchanter heavy regions as well. She's definitely a bit more conditional depending on what support is played, because that can kind of warp her laning phase pretty heavily compared to some of the other picks in the game. So that probably also takes her down a slight bit as well. So I'm gonna leave her in the C tier at the moment, but could probably be bumped up to the low B tier. A lot of the mid to even high end ADCs are actually pretty compressed with each other. So like the whatever. But the difference between these champions aren't so big that like it outvalues just straight up raw champion mastery. Like if you're comfortable on like any of the, okay, maybe not any of the C tier picks, but like Kai'Sa and like most of the B tier picks, it can just outright outvalue the S tier champions. That is just how pretty compressed the ADC like power level is at the moment. Moving on to the B tier, then we lead off Veigar, who I don't really recommend, but is still a pretty solid option for mid to low elo. He's obviously pretty heavily tailored around this bracket, having like scaling AP ratios and a scaling kit. This champion's very much the low to mid elo pick. People can make it work in high elo. I mean, there are people like Veigar, we choose the obvious one. There was another one who actually just straight up plays it in the bot lane role, but isn't coming to mind at the moment. It's not consistent. I don't really recommend it. It's like the same with like the Malzahar, for example. Like there are bot lane players who play bot lane Malzahar. I don't think it's like great, but like especially in like high MMR brackets, but it can work in mid to low elo where the kit can scale into the game and the champion traditionally doesn't. It's not easy to punish. Like if you can just get through laning phase on Veigar, then you can usually like push your advantage towards the mid to late game where you can have a lot more agency. Lux sits within the B tier. She's just played by a decent amount of OTPs. I'm pretty sure she's very popular in both, primarily in NA, like that. Same with like Zyra. It's actually quite interesting how when you go into like high elo NA, like Zyra ADC becomes quite a popular option. But Lux, I believe, also, especially in like mid to low elo, is a bit more popular over there. That is where like some of these champions pop up a bit more. In the US, don't think she's quite as popular, but it's still played sometimes. Like Lux is just a very popular champion, so she will have some level of bleed through into like other roles. I mean, mid and support are pretty just common roles for this champion, but then like your bot lane Lux, even your top lane Lux if Carbos is playing it. But anyway, I digress. Lux, solid B tier champion. I believe if you can snowball on this pick, she can actually be quite a valuable option. Has pretty good wave clear, and those are like the strengths of the champion. You can pair her with Engage. You can pair her with like Nami. I wouldn't say like traditional enchanters you'd really want to pair her with, but there have been like old school combos of like Lux Sona, but that it was like for a different reason, so maybe not so much at the moment. But I think the champion's in an okay spot. It can be played ADC if you so want to. Mel's placement massively differs just depending on your skill max. Like, most people still Q max on Mel, when E max has just been better for a while now. If you E max, she probably sits as more like an A, maybe even an S tier pick. Like, it genuinely gives her so much power. Like, wave clear, additional snare duration. It's really, really nice on this champion. But if you don't, then yeah, you're just going to lose a decent chunk of power of this champion. And because most people don't, she is just not as good of a champion. So she sits in the B tier at the moment. But definitely, if you max her in the correct order, she is a lot better of a champion. Varus sits within the B tier. He's never been the most performant ADC in solo queue. Like, he's obviously number one in competitive because of the tools he provides in that environment, especially with like lethality Varus providing poke, the setup with his ultimate, the very lane dominant champion he is. All very nice. Whereas in solo queue, he sees like both builds. Like, obviously Bort got buffed this patch, which is quite nice for him if you are playing the on-hit variation. I believe it's actually probably pushed them to being very, very close with each other. Lethality Varus just doesn't tend to operate as well, even though it was like his best build in the previous patch and probably still is his best build. It doesn't tend to operate as well within solo queue because you rely on, like, you want time to be able to chunk people down. You want people to play on your ultimate. You're just not going to as consistently get that, like, people to kind of work around you with that. So it definitely hurts him within the role. And for that, I don't really recommend him as much in solo queue. Like, he's still a good option, and if you're really comfortable playing him, he can be quite valuable, but not like the B1 Varus of competitive. It's just not the same champion when played in solo queue. Aphelios, people have gradually like come to the conclusion that Aphelios is a very strong champion. Even before the recent set of buffs, he's been in a pretty solid spot. Especially if you've got a lot of mastery on the champion, I understand how to do his gun rotations. The pick's actually pretty good. There is obviously a barrier to entry when playing Aphelios. He is very unique in the way he functions, and being a hyper carry, you want to you do have to understand kind of where the power of the kit lies. But if you're comfortable playing the champion, I think he's in a very good spot at the moment, and definitely with mastery, probably jumps up to the A tier, maybe even S tier. Like, there are a lot of these champions kind of like lingering around at the moment where if you've put the time into them, they're actually really rewarding to play, and I think Aphelios very much fits in that boat. Xayah is a bit more dependent on counterpick. Like, if you get counterpicks Xayah and you play her in a good matchup, she's a very valuable champion. She does have weaker matchups and into champions which don't really force her to like get the value out of the kit which she wants. She drops. Like, she just isn't as good as an option. And a lot of the time you'll see that. Like, if you play Xayah generalistically, yeah, she probably sits as a more like a low B tier champion. But if you find the right spot to play her, very solid A tier option. Probably, and if you pair with the right supports, pretty desirable as a marksman. Like, if you understand how to play the kit, I think as a counterpick, she can be a very good option. Don't blind her. I'd recommend just other champions to blind. There are decent S tier options, which I will talk about in a moment, which I think are very solid blind picks. Caitlyn, probably, do I want to drop Caitlyn down to the C tier? I'm not as much of a fan of Caitlyn at the moment. I think Caitlyn relies on two things, and that is, Caitlyn has two strengths, more than anything. The really powerful range and, like, the laning phase, which you can kind of facilitate using this range. Obviously, she's had a lot of power siphoned out of her laning phase over time, but there is still strength to this. There is still strength to having 650 range from level 1. Being able to abuse that range to either get push in lane or to kind of just like kite people out, it's really powerful. The other side of Caitlyn is the fact that once you get to like 3-4 items, you can just one-shot people. That is the other strength of the champion. Right now, I think you have to exploit both of them. Like, I don't think you can get away with just doing one and expecting to win on this champion. And for that, I think she definitely takes a bit of a tax. Like, if you don't win lane on Caitlyn, you are relying on just getting to the late game and hoping that you can kind of come back in and then like scale up, because you do have to be able to play both at the moment, in my opinion. So Caitlyn, I'm going to drop it down to the C tier. Might change my stance on that maybe going into next patch, but right now I do think you have to be able to do both, otherwise the pick just isn't as good in its current state. Samira, I'm leaving her as like a low B tier champion. I still think she has a very steep mastery curve, but the buffs have helped her. She's definitely in a lot better of a spot. I still think she lingers like in the general area of the B tier at the moment, but she's also kind of dependent on being paired with engaged supports. If you pair with an enchanter, she just isn't as good as some of the other options, which is where, kind of akin to Kaiser, she's just gonna suffer as a champion. Seraphine hasn't been performing as well as of recent. I do think that she is I mean, she's still a really good jack of all trades champion and like a great mage in that aspect, but not quite as powerful as she has been. That's just like what it comes down to. I think she's gone from being like an A tier pick to more like a fine mage you can opt into in the B tier. I just don't think she's quite as desirable, and you're gonna lose some level of agency when playing a champion like Seraphine, because you are giving up some level of damage for a bit more utility, a bit more crowd control, which is all, I mean that's a fine trade to make, but in solo queue, you want agency. That is a very powerful thing to have at the moment. Being able to impact the game more individually can allow you to more consistently win, and I just think Seraphine kind of drops away from that compared to some of the other options in the bot lane, almost every other option in fact, because most ADCs are just raw damage at the end of the day. Moving on to the A tier, and we lead off Lucian, who obviously had the tap down on his E not too long ago. It did something. He's still a good option though. I still think he pairs really nice with just a large plethora of champions. Gone are the days of Lucian where you can only really pair him with Nami. He pairs nicely with Engaged. You can pair him with like a lot of actually like enchanters which are a bit more slept on, like your Sonas and your Yumis. I mean, they're a bit more well known these days, but are pretty strong pairings alongside the Lucian, so definitely something to be aware of. But yeah, I think generalistically the champions has been in a pretty solid spot for a while now, so I do kind of have him as like an A2 option. Definitely want to play around his strong mid game though. That is where the champion really spikes. He will get outscaled by other options as the game goes on. Ashe benefited from Bork, Kraken and PD being buffed this patch, depending on what you opt into. Obviously, Ashe has different builds which kind of pop up every so often, and it comes down to a lot of what your preference is, whether you are playing these on-hit variations or your crit variations. I believe we're currently mostly seeing crit variations, whether that is Yuntao into PD. I actually don't know. I haven't checked on the shift of her builds. I will do that quickly now. It looks like Yuntao PD is still her standard build, but Kraken performs really nicely on her, so definitely some level of flexibility there. But yeah, PD second, probably like spitting out pretty good numbers, so definitely what I would recommend going when playing this champion. Overall, yeah, I think she still maintains her spot as a pretty solid A tier champion. You're giving up some of your damage for a bit more utility, but her kiting potential, she still has a strong laning phase, she still scales pretty well. Like, I think there's just a lot of things going well for Ashe at the moment, and I still do recommend her as like a pretty solid A tier option. Twitch is is going to benefit from Bork buffs this patch. Akin to the likes of Vayne. Both these champions are very solo queue-esque champions, and both of them were definitely struggling a bit by their core item just not being quite as good. But Twitch, if you're opting into Bork and not opting into Yuntao, because I believe that was what he was primarily going, like a lot of the ADCs were just outright going Yuntao. Yeah, but I mean, actually he's still going Yuntao. Actually, there's a couple of things to talk about Twitch. So Bork Twitch still looks to be underperforming, actually. So still recommend going Yuntao. Collector looks still like a pretty solid first item option. AP Twitch, I believe, is slept on. I've actually played with a couple of AP Twitches recently. I think more people have kind of picked it up, with, I believe, Ratarel playing it, if I remember correctly. Like his pick rate has 3x. When playing AP Twitch, especially in bot lane, play PTA, don't play Halo Blades. It looks a lot better when you're playing PTA variations of the build. And yeah, I'd recommend giving it a try. Twitch as a champion, I think he's kind of slept on at the moment. There are like, obviously he's very unique in the way he wants to function as a champion, but definitely the flexibility of both the AD and the AP builds kind of existing at the moment does give more strength to the champion. So definitely Twitch as an option. Recommend trying him at the moment. Swain, same as always with this champion. It's if you can find the right spots to play the pick and you have some level of mastery, he can be a really, really powerful option. Maybe because he's a bit more dependent on mastery in right spots, he should probably be like a low A2 option. But in those like low damage compositions, he is incredibly, incredibly potent as an option. And most lanes struggle to play against him when you get access to like your core components and then like your first item. This champion does have a lot of wave clear through his Q, and his just general like sticking power is really, really nice once you get access to things like Rhyalize. Hui is still one of my favorite mages in the bot lane, and I'm gonna have Ziggs here as well. Some people may say I've over or underrated Ziggs. It can honestly depend, depending on who you ask. But Ziggs as a champion obviously benefited from his buffs this patch. They were trying to push them more towards mid lane, so he got scaling AP ratios, but he generally just gained a lot of power. I believe they were trying to give him some power as he had kind of dropped out competitive to an extent and wasn't performing that well within solo queue. So general power up, not being nerfed in 25.15, so definitely something to be aware of. And these two mages are probably what I'd recommend going to if you are looking for just, like AP options in the bot lane. Ziggs, like, gained a decent chunk of power. Hui, just a really nice traditional mage, great stalling potential, great like holding potential. Like his wave clear is really nice, so it's really hard to siege against this champion. And his just overall damage, his like through team fights, and honestly even burst in the right situations are really high. So I actually recommend the champion. I quite like Hui as an option in the bot lane. Smolder remains as an A tier champion, probably dropped a bit. Some of the like the lower champions have definitely, I mean, some of the champions which haven't been buffed directly with like the Bork, the PD, and the Kraken side buffs this patch are going to lose power. Smolder gonna be an example of that. He goes from being like a high A tier or high mid A tier option to more like a mid to low end A tier option. I still think if you can get stacks on this champion and you're playing him into the right compositions, he can be really valuable, but he just becomes a slight bit more dependent on those right compositions because other ADCs are going to be more commendable now, and like some of them will take some of the spots where you originally might have been playing Smolder. Jhin and Senna wrap up the A tier options in the case, actually I'll probably end up dropping some down, but like Jhin and Senna are the two which remain from the previous patch. Jhin, really good like utility marksman. Yeah, he's still considered utility marksman. Like I still pair him alongside like the Ashes of this world. And honestly, like to an extent, Senna is like kind of in the similar vein where you don't quite have as much agency and damage as some of the other champions in the bot lane, but you do have utility to kind of make up for it, and it can be really powerful in the right compositions. Obviously, Jhin can struggle into certain like high armor or just like high health like champions because he doesn't have the same level of like DPS, which which most other marksmen have. That is where the champion suffers. In the case of Senna, she does kind of rely on getting to like your 1, your 2 item power spikes once you get access to your static, once you get access to like your cleavers, but that's where the champion really like shines as an option. Before that, she can definitely struggle. She's got a pretty small health pool, like she is very vulnerable to just being snowballed on, and that is like the biggest weakness of the champion. But definitely with the kind of with the buffs you received and then the follow-up nerfs, and then the people like coming to the conclusion that like the build and realizing like what good builds she has, she remains as like an A2 option. I think she's an above the par marksman. I recommend her if you are like comfortable with the playstyle. Moving on to the ST event, so there's a lot of champions to talk about here. Do I want to drop Zeri down? Sure, I'll drop Zeri down. She just doesn't benefit from the buffs compared to the other marksmen here. A lot of the other marksmen here, and she was the low S tier option, so I'm going to drop her down. Might also drop Yasuo down. He got nerfed this patch alongside Bork being buffed because he was going to be one of the biggest winners of it. He was generally like a strong option. Whether he might get moved back up to the S the next patch. It would depending on like what his trajectory is. But he lost more power this patch than he gained through Bork being buffed because of the 0.5 AD growth loss on the champion, especially in mid to low MMR brackets where scaling enough is going to matter more. The champion is going to be a slight bit weaker. The other champions here. So we're going to I'll lead off with Vayne. Vayne I'm bumping up to the S tier because she was one of the biggest winners this patch. Vayne was already a very performant mid to low solo queue ADC. She consistently wins games in this bracket through just being a good scaling option. Like, people aren't going to punish you for having a weaker laning phase. They're not going to punish you for having shorter range. And if you can get to like your 1, your 2 item spikes, like your Bork spike, your PD spike if you opt into it, traditionally it's like still Bork, Ginsu, like that's still primarily what most people go on with champion. But like PD does exist now as an option. Kraken exists. I believe Kraken first is like something you can opt into if you do want it. Vayne's definitely benefited as a champion. She was probably the biggest winner of this patch, and I'm going to bump her up to the S tier. I think if you play Vayne at the moment and you are playing in like the diamond to probably even like plat region, she can be a 1v9 champion like consistently. Like if you get the gold and you understand how to pilot the pick. The other picks within the S tier include Tristana, who is still in a very solid spot, still great scaling, really good early game, great wave clear. Just a lot of things are still going really well for this champion. Obviously, didn't benefit from the buffs this patch, unlike a lot of the other champions. But still, just like the Yuntao IE core, looks really nice on her. Does a huge amount of damage once you get access to like the item spikes. Still think she's a great option. Neela is getting nerfed next patch, primarily because I believe their logic was she is #1 win rate ADC at the moment. I do like Neela. I think she's a great pick. I think in the right compositions and with the right pairing, she really shines as an option. You don't tend to see her outside of like really high mastery players, which is probably why to an extent her win rate is going to be inflated. But if you are very comfortable playing with champion, you play it in the right spots, I still think she's going to be rewarding. And even next patch where the changes are trying to siphon out some of her late game power, give her +2 base AD, I still see her being a very solid option, so I'm going to remain leave her as a remaining S tier option. Kog'Maw benefited from Bork being buffed this patch. He, I believe, should have been going Ginsu still, like previously. Maybe not so much anymore. I believe Bork, Ginsu's, and Krakens there all look like pretty competitive first item options. So it probably come down to what you feel most comfortable playing and like what works quite like nicely within the game. Obviously, Ginsu's is a very early game skewed item. It's I believe that like item had been misinterpreted for quite a while, but more recently like people understand that it's just a very strong like second item option, like just being able to get that flat on hit damage combined with just the stats of the item are really nice for these champions. And Kog'Maw in a really good spot at the moment, benefits from the walk changes, definitely still one of my premier, is going up to being like one of my premier recommended S tier options. The other S tier pick, so I believe MF is probably slightly lower than the other two here. I still think she's a really good option, does a lot of damage, pretty trivial to play, really nice for mid to low elo brackets. I think she can be really rewarding in that aspect. Doesn't really want to be played with enchanters though, and that is probably the biggest mark of the pick. Struggles with some of the support pairings, whereas Jinx and Sivir generalistically can be paired with most things and get most of the value of the champion out of them. If you play them with an engaged support, it gives them some level of peel, some level of setup, which can be really nice. If you play them with enchanters, they become really, really oppressive hyper, like even more oppressive hyper carries. These champions right now feel quite inevitable. That's kind of like the term I use. Like it's like the same thing for Smolder when he was really strong. Is once they reach a certain point, it feels like they really are difficult to shut down, and that is why I recommend these champions at the moment, because I do also believe they are quite trivial to play. They are very easy to understand, and like the gameplay patterns really repetitive. Like you can consistently take these champions into game after game after game and pick them up pretty quickly, so I think that can be quite a rewarding aspect of them. I do believe that, yeah, just your Jinx, Sivir, MF core are still really, really nice. Tristana, a great hyper carry option to lean into as well, with like a really oppressive laning phase if you play it correctly. Kog'Maw and Neela are pretty niche options, but are both really strong at the moment. Vayne is a great solo queue option. Obviously this is for solo queue, and that is going to just be why she is quite strong at the moment. Does struggle in like higher MMR brackets, especially in bot lane where you are just going to be punished more for like having a weaker laning phase. And just generalistically, I believe bot lane, like S2B and even some of the high C2 options are really close. Like, but it's not a big gap between a lot of these champions, because if you pick them in the right spot, if you have some level of mastery on them, it does make the difference. Like, it will matter so much. Like, an Aphelios can outvalue a Jinx if you are comfortable playing Aphelios. So just like something to keep in mind. Don't play what you think is just strong, play what you feel comfortable with, and then works nicely within like the current pool, or just like the large pool of champions. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.